Well, hi, welcome to, I guess we call this episode 2 of Lean Coffee Talk. It's the 52nd podcast that we've done together. I'm Mark Graban, co-host, joined by
Jamie Flinchbaugh. Good to have everybody with us, and good to see you again. And yep, season 2, Lean Coffee Talk, formerly known as Lean Whiskey.
I've got my mug. If there was whiskey and if I was hiding whiskey in there, you wouldn't be able to see. But trust me, I'm sipping hot coffee, and Jamie will be doing the same here soon.
Yep. So yep, now we can record any time of day we want. So but a coffee mug is a good way to hide whatever it is you decide to drink at any moment. We know there's been some stuff out there. As people do more meetings. So anyway, we're not here to talk about.
And by the way, I don't do that.
Don't do that. No, bad practice. We were always very transparent. That's why we did Lean Whiskey, so that we were way out in the open that we were drinking whiskey while talking about lean stuff.
Recording it in the evening or on the weekend. It's 2:10 Eastern time as we record this. It's about as late in the day as I want to drink coffee.
Yeah, me too. And I usually am on to a decaf as a switch out at this point. So, or tea.
We can do an episode about decaf someday.
We can do an episode about decaf. Lots to do. Not bad if you do it right. So we'll get back to coffee. But you've had your own little coffee adventure, traveling the world just to taste coffee for Lean Coffee Talk, right?
That was the secondary benefit.
Tertiary benefit, maybe further down the line. But you were recently on Australia.
Yes, Australia and Auckland, New Zealand. So I want to say hi to anybody who might be listening, because I did meet at least one listener of the Lean Whiskey podcast, as we previously called it, and he was a big fan of what we talk about, even beyond the whiskey. So I hope that Aussie is still listening to Lean Coffee Talk. But AME Australia was kind enough to invite me down there to teach the same workshop in 5 different cities across Australia and Auckland, New Zealand. So it was basically, we framed it as improving the way we improve. In the morning, I taught about psychological safety as a foundation for continuous improvement. And then in the afternoon, it was about variation and metrics and process behavior charts. So we did the red bead game, and I'll tell you, it lands, it all lands exactly the same when we talk about shifting away from punishing mistakes to being better about learning from them and helping people feel safe, pointing out mistakes, and then all the dynamics of the red bead game across industries, across countries. It lands just the same. These are pretty universal dynamics. I guess I'd say, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, at some level you kind of go, well, we should have all learned these lessons by now, and it shouldn't land that hard. But I think it's they are lessons that are often counterintuitive to human nature. So
sure.
So I don't think it's that there's a systematic input. There are, but the core is not that there's a systematic input that we're constantly recorrecting by teaching the red bead game. It's that it's counter to human nature. Mm-hmm. And so we're using logic and systems thinking and data and other things to prevent us from being our own worst enemies and overreacting to the wrong signals. So yeah, and it became a good opportunity, excuse maybe the wrong word, to experience Australia and New Zealand, which is, a lot of people travel all that distance just for that.
Yeah. And I did go find a nice whiskey bar in each city. But the thing we're going to talk about here today a little bit is coffee culture. I learned it is very much an espresso beverage culture. Mm-hmm. Most everybody is doing espresso-based drinks. You can get a drip coffee. I did go to a hipster, fancy gourmet coffee bar in one of the cities that did the pour over coffee thing that we're going to be talking about, and Jamie's going to be demonstrating here today. So you can find that, but the barista espresso beverages were common, and I learned even before I got down there. I'd watched a couple of videos about what to expect when visiting Australia, and there are terminology differences. So instead of ordering an espresso or an Americano, you would order a short black or a tall black. No, a long black.
Long black. Yep.
Long black. My mistake. A short black and a long black. But the thing I got tripped up on there is sometimes you would order a long black, basically an Americano, then they would ask you what size. So if I was thinking in Starbucks terminology, you might be thinking a tall long black, but to them that was like a small long black or a medium long black. And then basically a cortado, I think it was like a smaller version of a cortado. They call that a piccolo.
Right.
And it took me about a week to figure that out because I like my espresso drinks without a lot of milk. And so I started ordering piccolos if I wasn't drinking short black or long black.
Yeah, and that's sort of my preference. And, and it's not an Australian invention. It's just that they're less influenced by North American coffee culture. Obviously, cortada is not an American drink, but we've, close enough that we've adopted it. So much so that it's hard to get a piccolo or a macchiato, even a real macchiato, not a stupid Starbucks one, but but a macchiato, because the cortada, which is great, is so popular. And in a future episode, we can maybe go deeper into what's the difference between a long black and Americano and maybe taste those. But yeah, they take their coffee pretty seriously down there, as they do a lot of things, right? They enjoy their culture and as they should. They it's unique. It stands out. It's Australian and New Zealand culture, and it's not, it's Western, right? It's Australian. Is how they do things. So no, it's great to get down there and experience the whiskey bars, the coffee bars, the espresso bars, and see how they do things.
Yeah, and you did call me out. I was trying to skirt past that the long black and Americano are not exactly the same, but they're in the same.
No, but most people don't know that, and like I said, we'll get into that in a future episode. But honestly, most cafes would just, if you ordered one, they'd give you the other and not care, right? Or not.
And I wouldn't have noticed.
Right, I wouldn't have noticed. So it took me a while to figure out why I like one more than the other. So
but I also wanted to share a little bit about how coffee was probably a tertiary reason to go. Reason one, primary was the workshop. Secondary reason, I think, was animals. So if people and human behavior and organizational dynamics are very much similar, even if it's a different accent or different accents across Australia, as I kind of picked up on a little bit. Some of the animals, of course, are incredibly unique. So I went to the zoo, the Melbourne Zoo. In fact, the workshop was taught in a room on property at the Melbourne Zoo, and there was the meeting room we were in had two sides of it, glass walls, and there were some monkeys outside, and you could occasionally see them. They weren't hugely distracting, but that was cool to be there. I went to the Sydney Zoo, and then outside of Brisbane, they have what they call the Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary, and so they have other animals. And I did a long visit there with a guide, and it was a small group. There, in some of the Australian states, they don't let you touch koalas anymore. They certainly don't want you to hold koalas. But in Brisbane, I was actually able to kind of touch the back of a koala, and they limit, I think, for the benefit and the mental health or the welfare of the koalas, they limit them to 3 9-minute visits a day. Like they literally set a timer for our group, 9 minutes, and off it goes. Because they say the koalas might get stressed and then they get sick, physically sick. So
and they need a lot of sleep.
They do.
Interestingly, because their main, they eat a food source, eucalyptus, that they kind of get to themselves, right? Which is their niche in the world. But it has really poor nutritional value.
Right.
So as a result, they just don't have a lot of energy.
Well, and sleeping up in the trees protects them pretty well from predators.
Yep.
But at the koala sanctuary, when they're not sleeping and not eating, they're actually pretty agile, climbing on a branch. Or I was actually dumbfounded, and I caught some video. They will jump from branch to branch.
Yeah, it's not a lack of ability.
6-foot leap.
Yeah, it's not a lack of ability.
No,
right? It's just that they don't have the energy to play all day, right? No. So, again, because of their main niche food source. So, but no, those have to be fantastic experiences with animals. Of course, half of a North American zoo is there to expose you to the rest of the world. Yeah. When you have these animals that are, of course, our own as well, but yeah, when you have these animals that really stand out as distinctive to your environment, like you have down under, it's worth having and seeing in a zoo.
Yeah. Awesome. So I got to feed kangaroos. They will nibble right out of the palm of your hand. The feed, wallabies, emus. You're behind glass. The platypus. One thing I learned about platypus, for all the weird dynamics and features of a platypus, they're also venomous. I didn't know that, or I forgot that. They have what they call a spur on each back foot. And they if you were to antagonize a platypus, its one defense mechanism is to spike you. And they said, as a human, it's the most painful sting or whatever that you could get. It's not fatal, but they said it's so painful, and the way it attacks the nervous system, there is no antidote. And they basically have to put people in a coma because it's so painful that you wish you would die.
Wow.
So don't go try to pick up a platypus. If you see one in the wild, they said it'll tend to want to swim away from you. But I think you'd have to go really far out of your way to get spurred by one, but it happens.
Well, I'd imagine that, there's a reason YouTube exists, and it's mostly to display stupid people doing stupid things. So I'm sure that happens more than it should.
So lots of cool animal adventures, and can't say enough about Australia, the people there. Really a beautiful country, great people, great sights.
Awesome. Neat opportunity.
It was.
And welcome back.
Yeah. One other funny little, this is, tidbit I saw in the news earlier. It's funny when people have names that are like well suited to their job or their profession. I learned from a news article, the CEO of Starbucks International is named Brady Brewer. So you think he's destined to work in coffee or beer. And of course, their former COO, no relation, it seems, was Rosalind Brewer.
Yep, who we talked about at one point on the show. You named somebody roaster and next, and you got the team. So that's you kind of think, did they have this in their mind at some point? Did somebody make the suggestion and they thought, maybe?
Yeah, it was destined to be, perhaps. Something I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they get tired of hearing that. Like,
I'm sure. Yeah. Probably heard it many, many times.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk coffee a little bit before we get into some of the lean coffee topics from the realm of manufacturing and lean. I'm going to let you lead us through this episode's coffee theme.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about pour overs, which is basically, one way to describe it is drip coffee, but you care about the results, so you're going to do it right. That's sort of one way to describe it.
And it's small batch.
Small batch, yeah. And very often one cup.
Yeah.
Right? Very often one cup. And if you're doing a really good coffee, like a geisha or something like that, this is almost exclusively how it would be served.
That's the pour over I had in Australia was a geisha coffee.
Fantastic. So great opportunity to even try a geisha. But that's where you want to pour over, because it's really meant to get the perfect amount of extraction into a cup of coffee and get most of it out right, mostly by sort of perfecting the amount of extraction you get through the grounds. So I'm actually going to do this while we talk. Sort of main two. There's an old school, right? This is the Chemex, and I kind of use
That's what I use.
The old school Chemex just because, I don't know, just because it's old school. And I thought that was cool. The other is often called the V60. That's actually more popular. It's certainly more popular in coffee shops because you just, it's not an extra work. You just plop it on top of a coffee mug. And I mean, you can also put it on top of a small pitcher, but put it on top of anything and do your single cup. Easy to wash, all that stuff. Doesn't have like leather and wood attached to it like this does.
Yeah.
So I do the Chemex. Now that, I think very important is you wash out the paper filter first, which means you'll get some water in the bottom.
Now, mine, I've got one with a reusable metal filter. Do you prefer
so you can use the reusable, but I'd say there's two benefits. And so you may not need to wash the paper fibers off the paper, the metal, but you want this warm. So, basically I'm putting some warm waters. This warm water's been sitting here. So now when I pour the coffee into this, the container is already warm. So I'm going to dump it.
Okay.
Now I will say, everybody has a mistake where, to My Favorite Mistakes podcast,
right,
where because they haven't had their coffee yet, they make some mistake in brewing.
Sure. Missing a step. So
the most common one for pour over is you forget to dump out your water before you then brew.
Yeah.
And now you have, diluted coffee.
Right.
So you may pick up on some beeps as I have to use both my kettle and my scale. Most important tool is a scale.
Because it's all done by weight. Yep.
Because it's all done by weight. So I'm already, I ground 20 grams of this, of my coffee here, and I'm going to dump that in. And usually I do this at a different height.
We could dig into the whole question of what kind of grinder do you use?
We absolutely could. And maybe there'll be a whole thing on grinding at some point. So I use a niche 0, as I can very quickly dial on anything I want. So you've got your grounds there. I've got 20 grams. There's a lot of different opinions about what to do with the grounds. I tend to make a little dimple in the middle.
And there's a question first of how big, when you talk about dialing it in, how big or small the coffee grounds are.
Yeah, and so once you get used to it, the process, once you kind of dial in your process, the recommendation is don't change the process to get a different result, change your grind. So you're getting a little, to extraction, go a little coarser, not enough extraction, go a little finer. But the idea is you want the water to pass through the grounds and extract the good stuff, right? The good stuff. But you don't want to over extract it and get the bad stuff, which, makes it taste, not as nice either. So there's sort of a right amount of extraction, under, over, both bad. And that's where the pour over is, when you do drip coffee, you just put it in, water drops in, and you're basically getting probably too much extraction from some of the grounds and not enough from others. And that's sort of the end result. So this will mostly be in 2 stages. So first is going to be the bloom. And so this is where I'm going to pour. You could basically do 2 to 3 times the weight of the coffee. I'm usually, like I said, I'm usually standing over this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get all the grounds wet.
Kind of swirling the water around a little bit. And it's really just getting all the grounds wet. So I'm at 60 now. So I'm at 3 times. And the point of this is to let the carbon dioxide evaporate or escape from the beans. It's the same thing you do when making a French press with the initial water pour.
Yep. And that has an easier way of, I'll say escaping, because at one point you're just, submerging some of that. But The point of this, and I'm kind of looking at my watch because I could use the timer, but I'm going to keep that off. Really, it's two ways to do this. One is really just measure about 30 to 60 seconds, or you just wait to see when there's no more bubbles. Right?
Yeah.
And the reason this is important is that while if this is the bean, I know there's people listening and they won't get this, so I'll be as visual as possible. But if you imagine a bean and there's gas coming out of it, then the water can't get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it basically bypasses it as the gas is escaping. So we're basically trying to, let the gas out, whatever else was in there. And the fresher the roast is, then the more gas needs to be emitted. If you get no bubbles, your beans are stale. That's just
That's a good tip.
Going to be true. So once you're past the bloom stage, now there's a whole lot of variation in technique. You want some agitation, but not too much agitation. You want to try to keep all the grounds, wet. Keep the water moving. You absolutely want a sort of gooseneck. The best way to do it is you get a gooseneck kettle.
Why is that important? Because I have a kettle without a gooseneck, and I try to control the pour.
It's just harder to control. Mm-hmm. It's harder to control the amount. It's harder to control the location. The gooseneck just allows a nice, even, easy flow with a lot of precision about where it's going. So a kettle's ideal because now it's also, this water is cooling off while it's in the kettle or in the pitcher. Where if it's a gooseneck kettle, it's staying the same temperature.
And you can specify you might not want exactly boiling temperature, right? A little bit low.
But you generally want pretty hot. This is not like tea where you want to go too cool.
Yeah, but it's like 200 Fahrenheit or compared to 212.
Yep.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So and I'm at 197 just because that's where my kettle's usually at for a range of, I just don't dial it in too much because it's close enough for all purposes.
Yeah.
I'm
not arguing 197 versus 200 with you. I was being approximate.
Right. So, basically here now I'm going for a total of 17 times the weight. In grams. So I'm keeping an eye on the scale, keeping an eye on the water. The water's continuing to flow. Yeah. It looks like I'll need a little more here. And basically the water's passing through the grounds. Mm-hmm. Nothing's sort of settling too much. There's a lot of arguments for occasionally swirling just to get those grounds moving, keep the water moving, get no pockets where water's flowing through too fast, no channeling as they would say, and sort of keep going until you get to your target weight.
Yeah, because you don't want the water coming too hard down directly through the grounds. It's got to steep and pick up those flavors on the way down.
Yeah, right? You want to keep moving, but not bypass, right? Mm-hmm. Not skip over, find a hole through the grounds, and just start, path of least resistance. So that's why you want a nice even bed. It's one of the reasons you stir, or you can mix with a spoon, but you may actually create clumps that way. It's the same thing with espresso. You don't want clumps. You want a nice even bed. And so when you stir, you keep it as even as possible. And, you notice that this is, way more work than drip coffee, than Keurig, than anything else. But the whole idea is, you're getting the cleanest version of that coffee because all the water is going through the coffee in sort of the right way, at the right balance, at the right mix. And so I end up with, 340 grams of coffee, which is, more than a cup for me. But and it takes a little time. Kind of at the end, it starts dripping. You can agitate a little more, keep it moving, and then when it sort of slows down and stops, that's when you take it off and you're done. toss away the grounds, and you're back and going. So this is actually. So I didn't time the full process because I'm really doing it more by weight than time. So it's actually really
you
just
probably have some gut feel of not needing to time it precisely, right?
Yeah, it's mostly visual, and once you get the weight right, it's mostly visual at that point. So, so here we have the ground.
Chemex with the coffee in it.
Cap it just to
help keep it hot.
Keep it cool, and pour myself a cup, and it'll probably be a little hot, so I'll let it cool off a bit. But there you have your coffee.
There you go. Excellent. I mean, as process people, there are so many more variables involved in making your own coffee at home compared to what you can do with whiskey or spirit. I mean, you can talk about the pros and cons of the method, the water, the beans, the grind, how much or how long, how dark are they roasted? Or, I mean, there's so many variables that you can experiment with to figure out like what's your preferred favorite cup of coffee.
Yeah, and I think the method and then the variables within the method matter a lot, and it's kind of what I love about it because you get to experiment, and that's why I to me coffee is not a caffeine delivery vehicle. Not why
tertiary benefit again.
Yeah. So tertiary benefit, secondary, at best.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy it. It's actually why I don't drink coffee first thing in the morning. I'll tend to wait till 9 or, usually not 2, but, so you get to control that. And again, here, this wasn't that long, but again, if you want to enjoy your coffee, it's far better than drip machine, or Keurig or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think of pour over coffee when I have it at a coffee shop, they're usually combining a couple of variables. There's the method, and then they're usually using nicer beans.
Yeah.
So it's more expensive usually because of the labor involved.
Yeah.
I've been to some places where they have a machine that does kind of an automated pour over. Have you seen those where it dispenses the water and does kind of the swirl and pause?
To make sure it's spread around, and you won't see most baristas swirl the V60 because they just don't have time, and they aren't likely to let it bloom for 60 seconds because you get most of the benefit in the first 30, so that's enough. Let's get moving. But yeah, I mean, would I buy bad beans and then do a pour over? No point, because you're gonna, it's like trying to figure out the best way to enjoy a bottle of Old Crow whiskey. Like you're not gonna.
Yeah.
So,
you're not going to take really good whiskey and mix Dr. Pepper with it, probably.
Right.
You're not going to take the world's best beans and grind them and put them into a reusable Keurig filter.
No, I mean, people will. And, I forget the guy's name now, but the Pappy Van Winkle air.
Right. They do drink it with Dr. Pepper.
Was it Dr. Pepper or 7-Up? I can remember.
I think it was Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper. So,
and a twist of lime.
To twist the line. So to each their own. I still follow that premise that people, I'm a coffee snob, but I don't look down on somebody because they enjoy a Keurig.
Drink what you like.
I'm going to be clear that's not better, but if that's what you want, that's fine.
Yeah, but I think of pour over coffees, and it's a combination. I think of good beans, the method. I think they tend to be a lighter roast that they're using, and so then that's where you get. And it's like power of suggestion, like with wine or with whiskey of like, oh, what are the things you're tasting? But you can get like these different berry notes, floral notes. It's almost more like a really interesting cup of tea sometimes compared to your typical drip over roasted, stupid Starbucks, as you called it. We're not going to have them as a sponsor, but that's fine.
No, we're not. Won't be the last time I probably badmouth them, but and again, teach their own. People love their Starbucks. Go for it. Happy for it.
I can see one out the window, and I'm a pretty frequent customer. So,
So no, I have no judgment if you like it. I just, if somebody invited me to Starbucks, I'd be saying, let's go somewhere else. So,
sure.
but they over roast, or they heavily roast, maybe, to remove the judgment from the word, because it's an easy way to achieve consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of a light roast and a pour over is to enjoy the variation.
Right.
Just like in whiskey, right? To tie back to 50 episodes of lean whiskey, a single barrel means you're going to have more variation,
right,
than when people blend it into their main product, and people love that, right? But if they want the consistency, you don't buy a single barrel; you buy the main product that distillery sells that's blended.
For sure.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I find it interesting on social media. A lot of millennials are apparently discovering that you can actually save money by brewing at home.
You can actually make coffee.
At home. They just never occurred to them. I'm not picking on a generation, but they grew up in a generation where they were taught you bought your coffee out. So so I think this is all making a comeback. It's why people are like, they don't realize this is what for those of us in Gen X, all of our parents probably had one of these Chemexes in their kitchen at some point. But
no, my parents were Mr. Coffee machine and either Folgers or Maxwell House. So.
No, I can't say I've ever seen it used, because once those machines started coming out, then these got put in a cabinet. But we'll put a video in from James Hoffman, who's one of the champion educators on pour over, and if you want to go into further nuance. My recipe, 2 to 3 times on the bloom, 45 seconds in, then 17 times the weight, and you're done. Drink, stir a couple times while you're pouring, and you're done. You can get more complicated. The video will take you into that, and enjoy.
All right. My cup of coffee is done. Jamie's just getting into his. So let's move on to the quote unquote lean coffee topics. We're not voting on these, where we don't have a timer set, but it's kind of like
we pre-voted
coffee. Huh?
We pre-voted.
We pre-selected the first topic. And, it's about questions that have been asked since you and I both went off to MIT in the mid-ish, late-ish 90s of like, what is the role of manufacturing in the employment base and the economy, and what national security and national competitiveness, and what all does that mean? And these questions are coming up again. It's political, and we're not here to debate politics. But there was a survey that we're going to talk about. This was published anyway in the Financial Times. And people were surveyed. The question was, do you agree or disagree? America is a statement. America would be better off if more people worked in manufacturing. 80% of Americans agreed with that statement. 20% disagreed. And this is actually, it was this Cato Institute 2024 Trade and Globalization National Survey, as reported by the Financial Times. So 80% say, well, yeah, we should have more manufacturing jobs. Second statement, I would be better off if I worked in a factory. Only 25% of Americans agreed, 73% disagreed, and 2% said, well, I do work in a factory. So what's your reaction to that, to those statements, and the disconnect between what we as a country should have versus what I want to do as an individual?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll tell you a story, but first I'll say the third question I would have asked is, would I want my kids working in a factory? Because I think that's where it goes wrong. I think we declare success for kids is going to college, instead of success for kids is finding something that works for them that they can do well and be successful at.
Sure.
And I'll tell you what, I didn't make more money than the tradesmen who worked in, one of the factories I worked in, really probably any of them. I didn't make more than them until I was well into my career.
Yeah.
They pulled in six figures easy. They worked hard. They did a good job. Most of them did a good job.
And they were skilled tradespeople.
They were skilled tradespeople. And so I get, I'll say menial labor where really is no skill in it. I'm not sure I'd want to do that either. I'm not sure I want my kids doing that. But the story I was going to tell, and I'm not going to mention who it is, so hopefully it doesn't feel like I'm telling this out of school, but they said they had one kid go into the trades, and they went back to high school, met with a guidance counselor for a younger kid. The guidance counselor asked what their first kid was doing. They told them they were in the trades, and the guidance counselor said, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Oh.
And when they told me the story, it made me mad.
Right.
It made me furious because here we have a guidance counselor looking at that as failure. And whether you work independently in a trade or go work as skilled labor, we are, one of the boards I sit on, we are trying desperately to find ways to get more welders. How do we build them since we can't hire them?
Yeah.
There's so much really good work out there. And sure, your destiny isn't in your hands. But if you go become an engineer, it isn't either. Intel, I don't remember.
Companies lay off engineers all the time, unfortunately.
Well, and Intel, I forget exactly the timing of this recording, but it's basically announced sort of that they're about to lay off like 20,000 people. And that's not factory. That's, engineers and business planners and all these people that went to college. And so I'm not sure it's more in your destiny. So to me, everybody has a way to contribute great things. There's a lot of often stability. That stability was lost, but skill is skill, and you may have to move jobs, but that's true of anything you do, any profession you choose.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remove the stigma from manufacturing jobs, so that people see this is not dangerous, or menial.
Well, and I've seen online chatter about this, and so many people like use a word like, oh well, we don't want these crappy factory jobs, and there are some crappy factory jobs, dirty, repetitive, unsafe, bad work environments, and there are some environments where that's not the case. And then what do we mean by factory jobs? There are team members and frontline production associates that might be the relatively lowest skilled work, but they can still be engaged in improvement. They can be respected. They can be treated well. They can have a good work environment. But then we need skilled trades. We need engineers, especially. So, if we were to magically build factories very quickly, well, who's going to work them and who's going to run them?
Yep.
We've been really de-emphasizing that, and not to put too much faith or stock, not to put too much weight, I should say, into pop culture. But I blogged years ago about how shows like Family Guy, are just really degrading. Of like, oh well, if you're working a factory, you're dumb. That's a dumb person job. Or even Homer Simpson at the nuclear plant. That's I guess the comedy there is that you shouldn't have somebody dumb in charge of safety or whatever a nuclear plant. But blue collar jobs are often degraded or the butt of jokes, and that doesn't.
I'll go back to I Love Lucy, and how it's just pressure and hard work, and you're going to screw up, and there's nothing redeeming about it, and the candy factory that they worked, and so. The fact is, if you go to, I think an interesting one was the movie Rudy, where there was a dichotomy created around family that works in the steel mill and a kid who wanted to go to college. Now, it was really a football movie, right? But but it emphasized that sort of dichotomy and where people wanted to go and what they wanted to do with their lives. But the fact is that and we've, quite frankly, out of a combination of need and regulation, factory jobs aren't very dirty. They aren't, and some are not dirty at all, right? I mean, there's an awful lot of environments where they make you wear special stuff to keep your dirt away from the factory.
Right.
So it's not dirty. It's there might be some inherently unsafe things in there, but between, again, regulation and safety and design, it's not unsafe. People aren't walking out left and right, missing fingers. And even back, I'll say in my last, working a shift in a factory, there's no way there's a factory in the United States as dirty as that one was. I mean, I did damage to my lungs on top of the asthma I already had,
right,
because of all the steel dust in the air. But it's not like that anymore. So
yeah, for me, it was inhaling, breathing, cutting fluid, which was happening, in the General Motors machining engine parts, and the union would advocate for the hourly workers about, hey, there's too much mist in the air. You need to do a study, and you need to better contain that. And but I'm out there as a salaried engineer. Part of my reward for going to Gemba is, I don't know exactly in 2 years what damage I might have done to my lungs.
Right.
So I had a physical once, and the doctor was asking, have you ever had COVID? And the answer was no. And he's like, well, you've got a little bit of that kind of like glassy lung kind of dynamic in the bottom of your lungs. I would never know or prove or disprove that was from the 2 years of General Motors.
Yep.
But there are good factories. There are bad factories. There's a spectrum.
There's a spectrum, without a doubt. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of honor, and despite periods in which there was lack of a future, I think there's a lot of evidence where there's just as much. Again, I think all jobs are at risk, but there's just as much stability, if not more, in especially skilled labor in a factory. I mean, if you're a welder, I don't want to say write your ticket, but you have options. You have lots of options.
Yeah. And then there's the job multiplier of, we're focusing, of course, on the direct production related jobs, but there's all the administrative functions, the impact on a community, of those dollars being spent, and people, bringing in food and all the other just indirect jobs that the wealth. I mean, value added as a lean term, quite literally means, like, through manufacturing, you can take raw materials, 1 + 1 can equal 3.
Yep.
I mean, you are actually creating something out of less than, or you're not just moving money around.
Right. And to be fair, some of the economy's shape has changed where, our numbers, our statistics about the loss of manufacturing jobs is a bit overstated. And this, I think, has hurt the narrative, because all these manufacturings went away, but a lot of them just changed. So, 30 years ago, if you were a truck driver, cafeteria worker, or security guard for Ford, you were a manufacturing worker because you worked for Ford. Now you're a truck driver, a cafe worker, or a security guard, and you're working for a service that provides a service to Ford.
That's a good point.
And there's quite a bit of that in the numbers. And I'm not saying we haven't seen a reduction in manufacturing jobs, but it's not as many as has been reported. And I think the narrative about all the jobs disappearing somewhat becomes self-fulfilling, where people don't want to do that work because they heard it's all gone away.
Sure.
It's not as bad as it was made out to seem.
So let's talk about making manufacturing environments better, manufacturing businesses better. The manufacturing that is happening still in the United States and in the news recently, and this has been in the news for 20 years at various times. The MEP program. Why don't you
Yeah.
introduce that
So
topic?
the MEPs are funded. It's called Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. You may work with one and not even know it. They are funded in part federally from NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they were meant originally to help with technology for small business.
Mm-hmm.
And it was started in, I believe, 1988.
Right.
And basically it's credited to Reagan, but really it was from Senator Fritz Hollings from South Carolina. He's the one who brought the bill forward and made
So
it.
by technology, was that like robotics and software, or
I think all of the above.
Yeah.
Yep. Material science and things like that. And in a lot of cases, you founded a company on technology. It's like actually the best thing you had to offer.
Yeah.
And so these companies kind of said, well, what we need really help with is our business stuff, right? And so the MEPs over time, they're still technically businesses. They get, I think, on average, I don't know if it's on average or up to, I've seen conflicting reports, but either on average or up to, and I think it's up to 50% of their funding from the federal government. Many get, and they're state by state. They vary from state to state.
And some are nonprofit.
Yeah, so they're technically, I think they're all some version of NGO or nonprofit. So, so they're overseen usually, I think, at a state level. Some states then outsource that to maybe a university and put it under a university as a housing agent for it. So then it has a home and it's not its own separate entity.
I think Iowa is that.
Iowa is one that is housed at Iowa State.
Texas is at, I think, UT Arlington, but I think Connecticut and Ohio, who I've done some work with in the past, I think are independent.
Yep. I know Georgia, I'm pretty sure was at Georgia Tech because I went to give a speech there. Michigan, we almost, when we co-founded the Lean Learning Center, we almost co-founded it as another co-founder was going to be the Michigan Manufacturing Technology Partnership. Technology Center, MMTC. And it didn't work out. That's fine. But I'm pretty sure that was standalone. So they get a lot of their funding from federal, some from state. And then the whole idea is they provide services to small and medium-sized manufacturers. And a lean became a big chunk of that for quite a while and still is in most cases.
Right.
In helping companies get cheaper.
It's subsidized, I guess.
It's subsidized, so they can offer lower cost consulting and education resources for lean work for small and medium-sized manufacturers. So that's kind of the whole idea behind it. So then we come to the news, and the news is that it's defunded.
And that's been proposed or threatened.
No, it's
every couple of years. It seems you hear talk.
So it's come about before, MEPs. Right?
Yeah,
and it's had micro threats too because states contribute to this, and so they'll pull their portion and say, "Oh, we don't want to do this at a state level." I actually still remember because I read the bill. Connecticut had a bill at one point. I think they felt like they wanted. I don't know what the motivation was, but I'll posit that it was to get more work for the MEP. So there was a state bill to require state agencies to hire the MEP to do work with them, which of course is outside the initial mandate. And I don't really care about that, but it was a state bill that was proposed that I'm pretty sure failed when it reached the floor, or maybe it never reached the floor. But so there's limited oversight in how they do it. And as a result, huge variation. But now the I believe it's done on a contract basis. And so all the states that were already up for renewal, their funding has been pulled. And all the others have been told there will be no renewals.
Mm.
So that's kind of where they stand, and we'll talk about it a much. We're not going to talk about it on what's the right answer to that, but just simply understand what are the MEPs, what do they do, what's their benefit, and then it's just a trade-off decision,
Sure.
right? And it's a non-trivial one, right? People's jobs are at jeopardy, and I don't want to make light of it, but there's trade-offs either way. We're not going to weigh in on that a whole lot, but it's important to understand what these things are for.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're going to have consistent, quote unquote, industrial policy, which I don't know if people talk that way, the way they did 30 years ago about countries having industrial policy. But if you're trying to encourage manufacturing and the success and competitiveness of manufacturing companies, the argument for MEP is that MEP has been helpful. Even back to 1988, the one news story about the creation of the program said lawmakers called for it to eventually become self-funded. So it was almost like the legislation was to get it rolling and subsidize the ramp up and then self-funding. But it says lawmakers removed that requirement in 1998. But there's pros and cons. I've heard the other side of the debate. Might be. I'm not going to name names, but I know one lean consultant sort of complained like, well, I'm competing against a subsidized competitor. And what about me as a small business? That's unfair to me as a provider. And if what I'm doing is so good and there's benefit to the companies, well, then why subsidize it? But
yeah. I think that's a fair argument. And the whole point, I mean, I'll say first, it's really hard to make a transition from an NGO to a for-profit, essentially a nonprofit and self-sustaining. That's hard because you need different kind of leadership and different kind of structure, different kind of prices. And if you kind of said, our prices on January 1st increased by 50%, well, all of a sudden you find whether it was worth it or not, it's just it would have been a lot, as opposed to perhaps let's have a ramp down, funding program and wean it off or whatever that might be. And to be fair, the variation around it, is very, very high. Pennsylvania they have a parent chapter, but then like near me is the Manufacturing Resource Center in the Lehigh Valley, and then down in York, where I'm from, it's Mantech, which I don't even remember what it stands for, but they're both MEP, agencies. And I've seen some really, really bad stuff. I won't call out what state it was, but I do recall
the quality of the work being done. You mean
quality of the work being done, or how it's being done? I mean, I would say caught, but witnessed one that would take their their subsidized work and earn it with a client, and then farm out the work to themselves. And so it's really subsidizing themselves, perhaps more than the manufacturer. Very questionable fraud-like things. And so, again, won't say what state that was, and that was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it isn't. Stuff still doesn't happen. So, and then there's some really good ones that have been, I'll say, so good they become, a beacon for other people out of state to come to their events and their training and things like that. I believe, and somebody can correct me if I have this wrong, I know it's not now, but Greater Boston Manufacturing Partnership, often well known for the Toast Kaizen video.
Yeah. Bruce.
I believe that started as MEP, and I don't think it is anymore, but I believe it started that way. So again, lots of examples of good stuff, lots of examples of some bad stuff. But the fact is, this was fully meant to be and has remained an investment in small and medium-sized manufacturers.
Yeah.
And that may be either shifting or going away, or we'll see a whole lot of variation because it'll really be up to the states at that point.
Yeah. Well, we have links to some of the news articles about the MEP programs in the show notes. Do you want to move on and talk about, we have two more topics.
Yep, let's do that.
One very much of the moment, one looking back 40 years to tease that. So headline, in fact, you sent it to me, my dad sent it to me, a few other people sent me this article from my original hometown, Detroit News. Here's the headline. Well, it's actually from the Seattle Times, but the link we have is Detroit News. Boeing sets new values after, quote, brutal employee feedback. And it says, the CEO, Kelly Ortberg, relatively new CEO, outsider CEO, shared 5 new values the company plans to adopt. Safety and quality as one, people focus, trust, ownership, and innovation. Like, these are new values. That's positive. What's your reaction to this list, Jamie?
Well, I'll first say I think the idea that they got brutal feedback on a cultural survey is positive. And the reason I say that is that I've used these tools for many, many years. And if people believe that no one's going to listen, they don't respond.
Sure.
Right. And so just getting participation in a cultural survey is very, very hard. And we often get very, very low rates unless you work really hard at it. And fundamentally, people need to believe that you'll do something with it.
Yeah.
So my first reaction is hopeful that the people believe the new leadership is ready to do something.
Yeah. And the article doesn't say what the response rate was, but it said only 27% of the participants said they would highly recommend Boeing as a place to work. So, the CEO is not blaming the workers. He says we need to improve the culture. Yep. It's up to leaders to make that happen and to enable the organization. So easier said than done, but good.
Yeah, so the values themselves, and I'm not a big fan of the term values just because, I think it's been overused and I think it's been often done at too high a level or too ambiguous a level. Right? There was a study that showed at one point 48% of the Fortune 500 had respect and integrity as 2 of their values. 48%. Sure. So how differentiating is it?
Right.
And one of those companies was Enron, by the way.
Right.
So the fact is that, I would always use as an example, like, well, nobody comes to work planning to work out of integrity, but they heard it's a corporate value, so instead they'll work in integrity. That's not right. It's not informative. It doesn't help us. So to me, these are nice things to decide to focus on. Saying there are things we want to, you could also say other things that are always going to be good, like speed or growth or, margin or whatever, right? Lots of things you can pick. So they pick some things and none of them sound bad, but there's still messaging in the selection itself. And so I'll say fair game, a decent selection based on where they've been recently. But by itself, far short, right? And of course, we don't know what happens next, right?
Yeah.
And that's the magic, right? That's that's like, an addict saying, I'm going to clean up. Okay, great. What's next, right?
Right.
They were addicted, if you will, to speed, to profit, to volume, and that hurt them. Okay, now prove it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the late Paul O'Neill would talk about companies that say safety is a top priority. And, he would say, well, where is the evidence that that's actually true? How would we know that to be true, that it's not just words? And, I think, I pulled up, I don't have it memorized, the list of KaiNexus values that came out of discussions with employees to understand what are the existing values of the company as opposed to aspirational values. But that list includes teamwork, kindness, customer focused, focus, trust and trustworthiness, empathy, curiosity, continuous improvement. Is the company and the people in it perfect? No. But, kind of stating these are the commonly held values allows us to be more intentional about maintaining those values as we grow, which I think is a good thing. And, my fear, and look, KaiNexus is not as old of a company as Boeing or somebody like that, but I think it's good that the executives are saying this is about leadership. If employees are feeling blamed, I think you very quickly get an arms crossed, well, F you response. So like, oh, wait. You're telling me we need to adopt safety and quality? Get out of here with that, right? I mean, like if they think that's being pointed at the workers instead of a reflection of leadership. And that's why we're getting brutal feedback, is that we haven't had safety and quality truly be evidenced as our top value.
Right. And I love this quote from an engineer for Boeing who asked to remain anonymous, and it's pretty insightful, but it's also just what's on everybody's mind. He said, "I think a lot of it is a sales pitch. We hear the same message all the time, but it's all different between what you say you're going to do and what the actual action is."
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll go back to why I'm not a big fan of values is you can't observe it. Right. So we talk about go to the Gemba. Why do you go to the Gemba? To observe what's actually happening.
Sure.
So you can surmise, you can infer what somebody's values are based on a pattern of actions and behaviors, but you can't actually see the value. Right. It's in here. It's in here. It's in our heads, our hearts. So whether it's in addition to or instead of, I kind of don't care. I'm not against values, but to me, in addition to is what are the observable behaviors that back it up, right?
Yeah.
And so, I have, we'll link to this. I have a video course on shaping culture where I go into this a little bit on my learning lab. But part of it is, well, what are the observable behaviors? And when they're observable, it's two things. One, as a leader, I can role model it.
Mm-hmm.
And two, as an employee, I can observe them either following that behavior or not following that behavior. Right. Now, safety and quality, I could argue they're close enough. We know what the right behaviors are for the most part. I may not need that a whole lot, but people focus, right? A lot of people take that as be nice, right?
Right.
Or
be soft on people,
be soft, or give leeway, or there's many different ways to interpret people first, or people focus. So heck, the meanest person in the world is sometimes people focused, right? So
yeah.
So how do I know somebody's exhibiting behaviors of people focus unless I define those behaviors?
Yeah.
And that's where I think it helps to get more definitive.
Yeah. Well, and I think of, it's just recently at the Shingo conference, and they use a lot of this language that beliefs inform behaviors, beliefs or principles or values or mindsets. There's a lot of different words. So yeah, I mean, you can observe the behaviors, and for this talk of like we need to value safety and quality. Like I very quickly get triggered because I think back to 30 years ago at General Motors when management would make decisions that harmed quality. And then when quality was bad, management would blame the workers for not caring about quality. That certainly did trigger a big, well, F you, get out of here with that reaction that was well-deserved. So I still have those scars and things that I'm still clearly working through. But I mean, you could see the behavior of the old school leaders, going out and pressuring people and yelling and screaming at them and pressuring them to get that damn machine up and running faster. Those behavior, you think, well, what are the mindsets of like, one of the mindsets was people are lazy and they don't care about getting the machine back up and running because they'd rather get paid to stand around waiting for it to get fixed instead of working, or a mindset of, well, they don't care about quality. And like, I think a lot of those mindsets led to a lot of really unhelpful, disrespectful, crappy behaviors.
Yep.
You don't know what's in their mind exactly. Sometimes they'll state the value pretty directly.
Right.
That, the workers are dumb and lazy and everything's their fault. But then we had better, the one I call the good plant manager, the NUMMI Toyota trained GM guy, who had different mindsets and definitely demonstrated different behaviors.
Yeah. And so that's where, the proof is in the pudding, and you need some small and everyday examples to demonstrate those values, but you're probably also going to hope for a given opportunity, an opportunity you can't script, right? You can't fake. You either exhibit the right behavior or you fail to, and those opportunities have to be presented to you. They have to happen by chance, and then you have to choose the right way. And hopefully, I think in the future, if we hear 3 to 5 years from now that Boeing's culture is different and better and stronger, this itself, by itself, won't be the turning point, but it may be the setup for the turning point.
Hopefully it's a helpful wake-up call. So it'll be.
I hope so.
Boeing's an important company, speaking of manufacturing jobs and national competitiveness and national security and international trade. It's a company that we need.
Yes, we need Boeing to do well. So we won't stop holding them accountable to do better.
Yeah. So another company, a big American brand that's got global reach and it's probably going to survive no matter what. They still have the number one market share in soft drinks is Coca-Cola, kind of classical non-diet Coke like Coca-Cola. 40 years ago this month, I remember this. I'm sure, Jamie, you remember it.
Yep.
The introduction of New Coke. And the long story short of it is that it was introduced with great fanfare. It was going to replace the original formulation. There was a huge backlash. They brought back the original formula as the redubbed Classic Coke, which nowadays I think is just Coke. And then the new formulation became New Coke, later Coke 2, and then later phased out. But it was really interesting to go back and reread some of the, you'd say at a high level, it seems like it was a mistake to introduce the new formulation, and some of the elements of the story I think were really fascinating. Was there some poor problem solving that was happening? Because Coca-Cola was still number one. They were losing some market share. The market share in fizzy sweetened drinks is lower now than it was 40 years ago. But there were taste tests. Like we remember the Take the Pepsi Challenge commercials. And in a side-by-side blind taste test, people preferred the taste of Pepsi, and Coca-Cola was trying to chase that sweeter flavor. But to me, it kind of begged the question of, well, if people preferred Pepsi, why weren't they already drinking Pepsi? Why do you need to turn Coke into Pepsi?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for starters, Coca-Cola at one point was so dominant that they don't have anywhere else to go but down in relative terms, right? So you're kind of stuck with grow the market or lose some market share profitably, right? And there's so did they need a different offering or did they need to change the offering? Those are big questions. Of course, today we've kind of figured out that we want, every variety, but in the end, people still buy what they go back to. They still buy core products. And I'm far from an expert. I'm not sure I've had a soda in 15 years. It's just hasn't appealed to me in a long time. And I don't even know when I stopped or why I stopped, but it doesn't appeal to me. But yeah, in a lot of times, especially in product marketing, whether it's platform marketing, or product design, whatever version or flavor you have, there's sort of it's our turn. We should do something, right? We should do something. We can't just sit on our laurels and hope nobody changes their mind. And yet there's some examples. I always like the Big Pen example of, no, the design works, don't change it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, don't choke a baby pinhole in the cap.
Yeah.
It stayed the same. So in a lot of ways, Coke was a longtime standard. It was a standard bearer. It was still market leading. So what problem are we trying to solve?
Right.
And
Yeah. And were they overreacting to a relatively small variation of market share? Because they were introducing Diet Coke, Cherry Coke. They were cannibalizing their own sales. And even this new Coke formula had been proposed as a brand extension. And then some people pushed back and said, well, stop cannibalizing. Like, who cares about that narrow brand if you're trying to run? Maybe you should look at market share by company, not by particular product. But I found a CBS News report from 1984, and this caught my attention. I blogged about this. The CBS Evening News with Dan Rather shows a 2 data point comparison column chart, which I hate this analysis. 1980 market share was 24.3. 1984 it was down to 21.8. And I think they didn't label a y-axis, but I think they made that jump look bigger than it might have actually been statistically. And so, I found another article with market share every 5 years from 1995 through roughly today. It's fluctuating. I made a process behavior chart of it. It's fluctuating. Coca-Cola's market share is fluctuating around 19%. So it may have dropped a little bit since then. Pepsi's market share has fallen from like 15% to 8%. So, Coca-Cola has been the more consistent, sustained market share because, you think, why do people want to be holding a can of Coca-Cola? There's brand loyalty, there's nostalgia, this is what my family drinks. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons beyond just the, chasing the flavor.
Yep. Yeah. And so, again, you can look back at org structures, brand managers, I've got this to win, or I'm in the lab and I've got to push a new agenda, or it's just my turn as CEO and I want to do something big. And there's all sorts of things that come along with it, but you see all these flaws, whether it's ill-defined problem statement, misreading data, overreacting to data. All these things start to lead to some bad decisions. And I think without question, we can say, based on the backlash, you made a bad decision.
Well, and there was an element of the story where it seems like, Coke, of course, went and market tested. Consumer products companies for the longest time have done test markets and taste tests and market research. And it sounds like they kind of downplayed, like, they said, like, 10 to 12% of their testers got really angry. It's not just that they didn't prefer the new version. And, maybe they thought, well, that's, they discounted that because it didn't fit into their narrative of what we need to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why I love in problem solving to make sure you define how you'll measure success early, because you can, once you start heading down the path towards a solution, how are you going to measure that? Well, whatever way helps us believe that our solution, we were smart.
Stop moving the goalposts, as they say.
And so, very clearly, I mean, somebody should say, if people are angry, what's that tell us? Right. But it wasn't, because it didn't fit the narrative of what we were trying to prove. And we didn't expect the backlash that was, we're taking away people a staple of their lives, quite frankly. Right.
Well, and for a very long time, there have been conspiracy theories that Coca-Cola always intended to introduce a new product and then make a big splash about Coke Classic, and that was all by design. And back a long time ago, the company president from Coca-Cola answered questions or speculation about that. He said, quote, "We're not that dumb and we're not that smart."
Yeah, which isn't a real answer, but I think it's very clear. No, it wasn't a master plan, for sure. But at the same time, we're not that dumb. Is they did fix it.
No, I mean, on some level, they admitted we screwed up, and here's a way to make it better. Like in more recent years, in the past year, I think Sonos, the pretty dominant speaker audio system with their app, like they came out with a brand new version of the app that people just absolutely hated, that it was broken. You took features away, and the company was really defensive and argumentative for a long time about, look, you need to get used to it. This doesn't suck. It is better. And I think the company eventually kind of admitted, yeah, this new app is a disaster, and we're gonna go back. And I think they went back to the old.
I don't think they went back.
Did they go back, or they just at least admitted that this sucks?
Yeah, and I think they made improvements, but I think it was an architectural change. So going back was going to be too hard, and I don't know. I use it every day, so I.
Did you hate the new version, or did you just roll?
I didn't, because I had my routines and what I was doing. So I had some problems, and because it had some just functionality problems where it just sort of crap out on you. And it's like, you can't find the speaker all of a sudden. And I don't know if that was, half the time I was just wondering if it was my internet, but versus the app. So, but yeah, I think no matter what, if your customers are up in arms, listen, right? If nothing else, right? Nothing else. No company is free of mistakes. If your customers are angry, listen.
Maybe a topic for another day, as I did read an article about how some of the consumer backlash against the touch screenification of automotive interiors is, I think Volkswagen in particular is saying, okay, we took it too far. We were copying. I mean, Tesla, I think, was the leader in some of this. And then, the customer feedback, which has always been my reaction, is that some of the stuff is just hard to use, and it's less safe because you have to take your eyes off the road. I'm a big fan. I don't mind a touch screen. I love Apple CarPlay with the vehicle I drive, but I also greatly appreciate that there's hard buttons for the volume and the temperature.
Yeah.
And the vehicle that we drive, the latest model year, has actually done away with those hard buttons, other than the volume knob on the steering wheel. And there's been some backlash that they've taken it too far, and maybe these companies are going to admit, okay, we've heard some backlash, let's adjust.
Yep, and I get it. Each knob or button is an assembly step, failure mode, although pretty rare, an extra wire, something to program, and so it's a whole lot if you can just program it into the touchscreen where. The screen's at the button for everything, but yeah, to the point, especially the point around safety. It's if I'm fumbling around trying to figure out where my, imagine if they start making turn signals, putting turn signals in there or something.
Oh, but I think some of the Tesla vehicles, like the windshield wipers, you have to dig into the touchscreen menus.
Yeah, that's insane.
Anyway, there's lots of these, different missteps, and do companies learn and adjust? But anyway, it makes me feel really old that it doesn't seem like that long ago, 40 years ago.
It's amazing.
The mistake of New Coke.
They don't even know what we're talking about. All right. So those are our 4 topics we got to cover today. Manufacturing jobs are good. MEPs had a role. Boeing howfully changes their culture, and don't screw up like Coke did.
Or learn from your mistakes and admit that.
Learn from your mistakes.
How'd your cup of coffee turn out? Was that a mistake, or was that good?
No, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a geisha set of beans, so it wasn't the best cup. But again, it's far better than I ever get out of a Keurig, because I get to taste the coffee. So no, I think. I'm a big fan of pour over. Again, most of the time I'm making myself espresso. That's my preferred way of drinking. But yeah, it turned out fine.
And real quick, geisha is kind of like a category or a quality grade of coffee. It's not a brand, right?
No, it's not a brand. It's pretty sure it's a quality grade. But
I think I've only had that. I think I've only had that type of coffee twice. One was a Japanese chef who was visiting a friend in Dallas who had brought some, and of course it sounds very Japanese, of course, but then in Australia, that one coffee bar had a couple of different geisha coffees that were from different parts of the world. So maybe do some research and we'll talk about that some other time on Lean Coffee Talk.
Sounds good. All right, so we like to wrap up with a cultural share, just something you've read, watched, experienced, done besides visiting koalas in Australia that you'd like to share. So why don't you?
Well, let me share yours first because I think there's a funny connection,
Sure.
and it comes back to animals. So
So I've been loving, like really loving, the Americas show that Tom Hanks is the narrator for. It's been on NBC/Peacock, and it's all about the Americas, North and South, and different regions, and all the different animals that go there, and the photography. I mean, there's at least 4 times throughout the series where they say this has never been caught on camera before.
Yeah.
So this wasn't like they ran out, took a few shots. They did their work. This was I believe a combination of maybe NBC Universal and BBC, if I remember correctly. But and Tom Hanks, of course, who wants a better? I mean, great narrator.
Well, BBC does a lot of these, and it's like Sir David Attenborough as the narrator, I think, famously, and like Planet Earth or whatever they're called.
Right. And these are, I enjoy these anyway, but my wife often doesn't, and so we don't get to watch them often. I could watch them by myself, but there's only so much of that I do. If I'm sitting by myself with a TV, it's probably for soccer. So,
right.
So yeah, we really both enjoyed it, and again, the storytelling was great. The photography was amazing, and we've watched the whole series now, and I can't recommend it enough.
I've got it on the DVR because it had caught my interest when it was being first promoted. My father-in-law was watching the series, and he told my wife and I about it because the episode called "The West Coast" had a segment about California sea lions, and he knows we fell in love with them when we lived in LA and saw them in the marina and right off the coast. So we did watch that one, and it was pretty spectacular. Now the connection, and we saw some similar types of things. Disney Plus, as a Disney nature film, I guess there's a whole production company or a series within Disney. This film, it's called Sea Lions of the Galapagos. So Galapagos sea lions, which I think are very close cousins of the California sea lion. And, it's a little hokey of like, they're kind of humanizing of like, oh, here's this little baby sea lion named Leo. And like, oh, it's adorable. And it doesn't have a name. And, but they're following through the, what the life cycle of a sea lion would be. And there's some amazing underwater footage and similar kind of things of like rarely caught on film moments. So, recommend that. And I think we're going to get down this rabbit hole of like, when you think like, oh, there's too much craziness going around and all this stress. And I'm like, now we see there's a similar film about elephants and a similar film about all kinds of other animals. So that might be the wholesome, let's just watch something kind of fun and take your mind off the world kind of films. So the biggest, the latest one, Sea Lions of the Galapagos. Now we also got into the film about the making of the film.
Yeah.
Called Guardians of the Galapagos. And now, I asked only half jokingly, did they make a film about the making of the film about the film? in the film, you don't see the cameras. In the making of, you see the people with the cameras filming the sea lions. So I want to hear the story of the people who filmed the people filming the sea lions.
That's what podcasts are for. That's where that storytelling comes in.
But
all right, so that's our share of this episode. So we covered a lot of ground. Thanks for the chat as always.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear people's feedback about topics that we've discussed. What do you think? You can go to our websites. You can email us. You can find us on LinkedIn. And if you've got ideas for topics that you would want us to shoot the breeze about,
Bring
let us
'em.
know.
Bring them. All right. Until next time. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Jamie. I still had a habit. I want to say cheers and clink a
I know.
glass, but I'll hold up my
Just not right with coffee.
hold up my coffee mug. All right. Thanks, Jamie.